Let's talk about loot boxes and gambling. I've been accused lately of being a corporate shill because of the recent videos I've made. Look, I don't agree with these buzzwords. I don't care about these buzzwords like anti-consumer and pro-consumer. Those words mean absolutely nothing to me. So I'm just going to ignore that completely. I just call myself a pragmatist, someone who objectively takes a look at things. I don't argue with my feelings. I argue with facts. And if that bothers you, that's completely fine. But I'm going to argue with facts on this one, why I think loot boxes should be considered gambling. Because if you look at what the government defines as gambling, what do you know? Loot boxes actually should be considered the same thing. And the reason why it's not, why nothing's happened yet, is beyond me. Because I think eventually something's got to give. I mean, within the next few years, I think something's going to happen. Congressmen are already looking at it as we speak. But whether or not an actual bill is going to go through the Senate floor and something's going to get passed, I don't know. But I think eventually it's going to happen. It's just a matter of when. Like with the ESRB being formed, it took this mass outrage over violent video games like Mortal Kombat, got national media attention, and that led to the Senate hearing. If it wasn't for the national media coverage on games like Mortal Kombat where heads are being ripped off and, oh, think of the children, think of the poor children, that led to the ESRB being created. But remember, the ESRB was created. It was a coalition of the biggest players in the gaming industry, like Nintendo, Sega, Atari, and even the 3DO company, and a whole bunch of other ones that were relevant back then in the mid-90s. They all formed the ESRB. They made the rules and the regulations of the ESRB because Senator Joe Lieberman, who was pretty much the head of this hearing and investigation on violent video games in the mid-90s, he pretty much said, his famous quote, "Regulate yourselves or we will regulate you." And that's why they all came together and formed the ESRB. And that's another thing, on the ESRB, don't take what the ESRB says as gospel. Like they said loot boxes aren't gambling. Hey, remember, the ESRB is a self-governing system. It's not an independent, impartial, it's part of the gaming industry. So just remember that when, you take the ESRB seriously. Of course they're going to say that loot boxes aren't gambling because ESRB is part of the gaming industry. It's not an outside independent organization. It's a self-governing organization that was only created to make the real government happy. So just keep that in mind. Like, if GameStop sells you an M-rated game, they're not going to legally be in trouble for that. But it's their store policy that says that they will only sell M-rated games to people who are 17 and older. Because they're just following the guidelines. Again, there's a difference between guidelines and laws. Just keep that in mind. But as far as the law is concerned, everything indicates that loot boxes are gambling. The biggest thing that determines whether or not something is gambling is skill versus chance. If something is almost entirely related on chance and has very little to do with skill, then that is a big way to determine whether or not something is gambling, okay? And that's very important because you look at the loot boxes, you look at Call of Duty supply drops and the battle packs. I know EA is getting rid of the battle packs, which, is kind of interesting. I think they just feel like they're going to lose more money in the long run if they continue this system over than if they don't, if they continue it. With that's what we saw with Battlefront. But Activision still does it. A whole bunch of other corporations still do it. So this is still an issue that is worth talking about. EA is a big player, and it is definitely one of the biggest players in the industry, and them backing away from the loot boxes is definitely a step in the right direction, but it's still an industry-wide problem that still needs to be addressed, because you still see them with Call of Duty and the supply drops, you still see them in mobile games all over the place, you still see them all over the place. And all of these loot boxes, what they have in common is, oh, you know, here's the loot box. You have a chance of getting the specific item that you want. They have certain items, instead of selling them as DLC, they are being put under the loot box. And Call of Duty is the greatest example of this because there's so many items that you can only obtain under the supply drop system. If you buy the season pass, you still can't get certain weapons. And it has absolutely nothing to do with skill. You could be one of the most skilled Call of Duty players. I know plenty of people who never put a dime into the supply drop system, had played Black Ops 3 specifically for 3 years, and haven't gotten anything. They still haven't gotten all of the weapons that they wanted. They've gotten some of them, sure, but some of the weapons that they still want, they still don't have. So I don't want to hear that it has anything to do with skill. People who say that you can be very skilled and still get everything doesn't know what the hell they're talking about. But yeah, that's one big thing that determines whether or not something is gambling. That's why slot machines are considered gambling, and going to those crane machines where you have the little crane on the top and you have the stuffed animals, and you know you try to navigate the crane to try to, you put a quarter in and you try to get, you know what I'm talking about. That's not considered gambling because you can actually be skilled and get it. I know plenty of kids throughout my childhood who were actually very skilled, and they did get those stuffed animals all the time. Every time I went during summer camp, we used to go to trips to, like, what was it back then? I forget, but one of those arcades. And you always knew that one kid who always got it. So it's obviously not entirely related on chance. It's a lot of it is related on skill. Now those ones I see in Six Flags, you know the ones I'm talking about that have the crane, but it has the iPhone on top? Yeah. I don't know. Maybe that should be considered gambling because I don't know a single person who could get that. But I think they purposely set the iPhone in a position where it's just impossible to get it. But that's just me. They probably don't even have a real iPhone in there, knowing that no one could ever get it. Who knows? But that's what I think. And then on the issue of trading cards, it obviously has nothing to do with skill, and it's all related to chance. But there's another thing that determines whether or not something is gambling that's separate from skill versus chance. And it has to do with the prize. Okay? When you gamble for money, you can get a prize out of it. Like, if you gamble $5 into it, and you can get $100 if you play a slot machine or scratch a lottery ticket. Those are obviously considered gambling. But if you put $5 into something with the loot box, and you don't get anything out of it, it's just digital items that have no intrinsic value, then that's actually should be considered worse than gambling. It definitely is gambling, but it shouldn't even be considered an investment because, trading stocks is considered an investment, and trading cards can also be considered an investment because, sure, I mean, you don't have an exact chance on getting the one card you want specifically, but at least those cards have intrinsic value that can be resold. With the loot boxes, that is not the case at all. So that's why trading cards and loot boxes, comparing them to each other, just makes no sense at all. And when people use that strawman argument of trading cards, oh look, trading cards are the exact same thing. No, they're fucking not. Because when you open a pack of trading cards, first of all, I never heard of someone who spent $1,000 on trading cards to get one card. Eventually, you're going to get the card. I mean, if you buy all the little packs and they're what, 25 cents, 50 cents? And again, a big thing that defines gambling that the government is if it poses a severe financial risk. Loot boxes can pose a severe financial risk. That's another thing that determines is the financial risk. And the reward is the other one, and then skill versus chance is the first one. So you look at all of those different things, and loot boxes should be considered gambling then, because again, it determines nothing related to skill. determines whether or not you can get a certain item at all, no matter what the fanboys may say. In relation to the prize, there really is no prize, because what happens when Call of Duty servers shut down, inevitably? What you spent your money on is literally worth nothing. But a trading card will always be a trading card. You know what I'm saying? So that's the third one. How much, like, the risk that actually goes into it. Loot boxes, comparing it to trading cards is not really an intellectual thing to do, because, again, nobody goes bankrupt off of trading cards. There are plenty of stories of people who do go bankrupt on loot boxes. So, yeah, I think definitely loot boxes should be regulated. The government should step in on this. Absolutely. If you want to be objective, if you want to look at the objective definitions of what gambling is, there is no way at all that loot boxes should not be considered the same as gambling. You just look at all the factors, the 3 factors that I went over, that determine whether or not something is gambling, defined by the U.S. government. Then loot boxes should definitely be considered gambling. And don't listen to what the ESRB says. Don't listen to what people within the gaming industry say, because they have that interest. Their interest is to maintain that system because it's way too profitable to get rid of it. So that's what we need to do to fix that system. Now, as far as the big implications are concerned, I'll talk about that for a little bit and then I'll close the video because this is one of my longer videos. What would happen? Would the entire industry collapse because there are no loot boxes? Loot boxes are a new phenomenon. We've had online multiplayer video games for 20 years now. And for only about 5 of them have this actually been like a policy that's been implemented. I mean, yeah. Like throughout the 6th generation, I didn't hear about anything about loot boxes. Even the first half of the 7th generation, and even the most of the 7th generation, I didn't hear about loot boxes at all. That first started happening at that time period with mobile phones. And those games having loot boxes, like those strategy games having loot boxes. But for the majority of online multiplayer gaming, loot boxes haven't even been a thing. And for that time period where loot boxes didn't exist, online multiplayer gaming was just fine. And it was actually better back then. No pay-to-win garbage, nothing like that. But again, I'm not using my opinions, my personal viewpoints, and yes, I absolutely hate loot boxes. I'm not using my personal opinion to determine my overall position on this. I'm just being objective here. But as far as the overall implications are, and people think this is going to hurt the gaming industry so much because so much revenue comes into loot boxes, like, look, the gaming industry will continue to grow, whether or not there are loot boxes. I know it might not seem that way because loot boxes make the majority of money, but if EA sees the writing on the wall, and they are pretty stingy when it comes to giving in to consumers, then it may be more profitable in the long run to not even have loot boxes in the first place. But as far as the government regulating it, if you want to be objective, they should. You can say it's going to hurt the gaming industry so much, but is the gaming industry really a good in its current state right now, where everything is pay to win, where so many consumers feel like they're being exploited, they're being extorted, and the overall quality of games has deteriorated because of this gaming system, the gambling system? Then how can you say that the gaming industry would suffer? EA and Activision are going to go nowhere. These corporations that have these systems in place are going nowhere. And the small indie ones, they don't even have that system in the first place because they don't want to get flack from it. That's usually what indie developers do. They don't implement these policies because they know it's going to hurt because they want to be as altruistic as possible because they're small companies and they want to attract customers. So this is not going to cause damage to the gaming industry at all. At all. So don't think that. Don't be afraid of that. But the government should enforce their laws. And that's pretty much what my position on it is. And that's pretty much all. Let me know what you guys think in the comments down below about loot boxes. Do you think they should be regulated? Do you think they should be considered gambling? If you disagree with anything I said in this video, let me know. It'd be interesting to have a little debate. I might start doing debates on my YouTube channel about certain topics. Should be interesting. So let me know in the comments what you think. Thank you guys for watching, for enduring for 15 minutes and 48 seconds. I appreciate it. And I'll see you next time.